I always hated road trips. I'm not using the term hate lightly. I've always absolutely hated long car rides, especially as a child. The hours on end spent cramped in the back of a vehicle drove me to the brink of absolute madness. The sound of the road seemed always just loud enough to make it impossible to carry on a conversation with my parents up front. That's how desperate I'd get for any kind of break from this monotony. I'd actually wish I could hear my parents. Sometimes my mom would try to make the trip a little less unbearable for the both of us. She'd buy a stack of comic books or a couple of new action figures and hide them until the dreaded day would arrive. Naturally, I knew about them and would usually end up looking at them beforehand, completely sabotaging the attempt. I guess I just always hated waiting, really. I'm gonna tell you about one of these trips. The most mind-numbingly boring trip yet. From my home in New York to my grandparents' house in Arizona. Yes, we drove to Arizona, and I'd already read all the comics days earlier. We stopped at a couple of hotels for the night along the way, and I got to stretch my legs in the school playgrounds if they happened to be closed. But the majority of the time, for days straight, was spent seated upright, seatbelt on, enveloped in the unforgiving drone of the tires on the pavement. I don't even know what state we were in when I saw the first billboard. It was weather-worn, paint-peeling, almost covered by overgrown trees, something largely unremarkable except for the image on it. Whimsywood was written in multicolored, balloon-like letters, and sat above the upturned head of a unicorn. As we whipped past the sign, I could barely catch the small text below the mythical creature's image. Games, rides, animals, family fun. 25 miles ahead. "Mom!" I shouted as loud as I could, overtaking the tires droned by several octaves. "Mom! Mom! Look, there's a park!" She had seen it. They both had. My father, driving, took his eyes off the road for a split second as the two exchanged an unsure glance. It was a look I understood, despite having never seen it before. And they didn't want to stop there. "Mom," I must have sounded incredibly pathetic, even though I wasn't trying, because she turned back with a smile. "Okay," she said, "if it's open, and we'll see how much it costs to get in." That was all I needed to hear. Now I was bouncing in my seat, utterly enthused, and I just felt renewed, sharper, and more alert after that stagnation of endless highway. I watched the occasional car pass by and looked into the windows whenever possible. I looked for another kid like me, maybe coming back from the park. If I saw one kid with a Whimsywood pennant, or an oversized stuffed animal, or even a simple smile on their face, I would just know the park was open. Every car that passed was empty though. Well, except for the grown-ups. But who cared about them? I tried to convince myself that the random sights on the side of the road were signs the park was indeed open. A soiled baby doll with a hole in his face. A colorful blanket fluttering in the branches of a dead tree. Even a sock monkey reclining on the road's center divider line. There were enough children passing through to leave those signals, so I was more and more convinced this was going to be awesome. A second billboard whizzed past. The same Whimsywood logo, the same unicorn's head, the same state of disrepair. Hanging off the billboard was a small wooden sign painted with red letters. Open. "Mom! Dad!" I know, I saw it. My dad turned to Mom again with a chuckle. "Well, I guess we're going." The final Whimsywood sign stood at the end of the gravel driveway that trailed a long way off before the tree line. The sign was much like the billboards, but despite being in better repair, it actually seemed even older. The lettering was hand-painted in an old-timey style, and the text beneath the unicorn's head differed slightly. Games of chance, mechanical rides, rare animals, wholesome fun for Junior and Sis. Dad didn't really like the idea of taking the gravel stretch. He grumbled and complained the whole way down as the tires crunched stone and kicked things up into the undercarriage. I heard a few curse words in there, but all I cared about was the fast approaching fun. Past the trees, the Whimsywood Park was spectacular. On the drive in, we were overlooking the entirety of the property. Several cleared acres with a short, long building essentially acting as a gateway between the downward sloping driveway and the gaming booths, petting zoo, and the carnival rides towards the back. I was probably vibrating at a dangerous frequency at this point, like I was on some kind of world's biggest sugar rush. "Wow," Mom remarked. "It's actually pretty nice." Dad started the car down the slope toward the parking lot with a deep sigh. The parking lot was about half filled with cars, which was probably a bit surprising to my parents. The minivans and station wagons scattered throughout the gravel expanse proved that, yes, Whimsywood was open. I didn't think anything of it though, racing to the front doors of the building to see if they were locked. "Hey!" Dad called out as I bolted forward. I froze in place, thought about what I must have done wrong, and sheepishly made my way back to his side. Together the three of us approached the building. More waiting. Dad pulled the door open and held it for Mom, and me first, of course. There was a wooden box in the front of the door that simply read, "Pay what you can. $5 for everyone over 3 suggested." I thought I saw Dad slip a $10 bill in and thought about protesting my age, but I was too excited to get inside. The interior of the building was dark, lit by row and row of arcade game cabinets and neon signs that hung on the walls. The signs weren't of any specific products, but they were more along the lines of general concepts. Fun, groovy, and tubular. Stuff like that. One that sticks in mind just confusingly read, "Superpower." I hadn't really been to an arcade yet at this time, so this had my jaw dragging on the floor. Now that we were indoors and there was no chance of getting back over by the van, I was free to run around like a lunatic. I was quickly lost among the beeps and shrieks and computerized music of about 100 video games. I checked them all out. A centipede-like game called Skull and Crossbow caught my attention the most. It had a little boy with a crossbow at the bottom of the screen, firing upwards at skeletons and skulls as they rolled across a graveyard, inching closer and closer to him. I ran back to my parents, and Mom already had a handful of quarters prepared for me. I played that game for a while, but couldn't get very far without dying. So that fun was over pretty quick. When I returned to my parents this time, they were talking to a third adult. She was a squat, heavy-set woman with stringy black hair and nasty net black dress clothes. She wore a unicorn horn on her forehead, attached with an elastic band. "Well," Dad said to the round lady, "here's the boy." The way Dad said it was the same as saying, "Okay, here's my way out of this conversation." The round old lady turned and leaned down to face level with me. Her face was wrinkled, worn, and old like the signs. She said hello with a large yellowish smile, and her breath smelled like urine. I didn't answer her. "He's shy," she explained. "It was nice talking to you." We quickly exited and walked to the large clearing behind the building. "Who was that?" I finally asked when we were out of earshot. "She works here," Dad said flatly. He paused and added, "Couldn't get a word in edgewise." We took a few steps before Mom and Dad exchanged the agitated look once again. For about 15 minutes, I ran from one attraction to the next as Dad repeatedly checked his watch. I didn't care. This was my one chance to actually enjoy myself. I wanted to take Dad's watch and smash it. I wanted to stay here, not go to stupid Arizona. The petting zoo had the usual fare. Goats, chickens, and a hell of a lot of feces. An old man sat on the hay bale in the center of the petting zoo as other kids around my age harassed the birds and acted wary of the goats. The old man was dressed a lot like the round woman, right down to the plastic unicorn on his head. He smiled at me. After I did the customary amount of petting and stepping in crap, the old man beckoned me over. I kept a safe distance from him, but I did approach. As I stood a couple of feet from the old man, he cast his gaze down at the straw beneath his feet. I did the same. Then he swept a bit of straw aside. Just beneath was one of the chickens. It was motionless, its head twisted several times around, jostled by the old man kicking the straw. A few maggots twisted and turned out of the creature's beak. I locked eyes with the old man, who was still smiling. "Don't tell the other kids," he whispered. "They'll all want to see." He put his fingers to his black speckled lips as if to shush me. I always loved animals, and even if I hadn't, this would have still been disturbing. I ran back to my mom with such an awkward gait that she knew to kneel down to catch me as I reached her. "What?" she asked. "What is it?" "There's a dead chicken." "Oh, it was under the straw by that man." "Well, I'm sure he'll get rid of it. Sometimes animals get old and they pass on. Remember, we talked about that." As you no doubt already know, that wasn't the problem I was having with the whole situation. Still, I didn't really have the mental tools to figure out exactly how I should clarify this situation. I held hands with Mom and Dad, almost hanging between them as I decided what I wanted to do next in the park. That's when an announcement echoed through the park, carried by rattling, tinny loudspeakers mounted on the telephone poles.
Welcome, Whimsy One Wee Ones. Hurry to Lumberjack's Timber Tunnel. All you little lumberjack and lumberjill toddle on over to the tunnel and get ready to laugh.
The announcer did a passable goofy impression, mixed with a hype style of an ad for a monster truck rally. "How about that?" Mom asked. "Want to do that?" I felt a little less sick now, almost entirely forgetting anything was wrong in the first place. "Sure." I perked up. Now, the Timber Tunnel was like any other given theme park tunnel ride. It had a metal track and a couple of roller coaster style carts, and a long tunnel the tracks led into. The mouth of the tunnel bore flat pieces of plywood, and outside of it stood a cutout of a burly lumberjack that looked like it had been left out in the rain for about a century. It was faded and worn, most of his facial features missing aside from a thick beard. I decided to get in the back. Other kids were already piling in, and there was a real sense that I might get shoved or kicked if I tried to work my way in any sooner than I did. The round woman was standing by the cart, making sure everyone was safe and secure by manhandling them and to see if they would come loose from the cart. Nearby, two people in a less than convincing two-man unicorn costume pranced and trotted around, the lead man making whining and snorting sounds. Next to me in the cart was a dweeby kid with Coke bottle glasses and a green and white striped shirt. He had a blob of snot rolling down his upper lip, which he would continually snort back up as he looked around in wonder. If this kid smiled any wider, his head would have fallen off. When the round woman finally made her way to the back of the cart, she jerked and jostled me roughly, her hands darting from my arms, to my chest, to my legs, and bumping my crotch in a way that gave me a fleeting feeling of extreme unease. It happened so quickly that she was already moving on before I could even croak out a word. And with that, the cart was off. All the kids waved to their parents, and they waved back. My hands were on the metal bar that held the kids in place as I stared towards my parents, still dumbfounded by what just happened. Mom and Dad waved. Their look of happiness turned into concern over my appearance just as I disappeared into the tunnel. After this all happened, all I wanted to do was to forget the song. It issued from unseen speakers over and over again with no variation. It was set way too loud, and a couple of kids ahead of me clasped their hands over their ears. Most of them just laughed, and one even said, "It's not that bad." We passed painted scenes of forest landscapes and little animatronic lumberjacks. They had about the same range of animation as desktop drinking bird toys, and were about the same size. It was like being on a train in a miniature train set. As we rounded a curve, the song loop sped up like the cassette tape was being played on fast forward. The screeching, high-pitched voice was ear-splitting. Now all the kids were covering their ears. I looked at the little mechanical people as we continued through the ride. They were moving faster, as well, blindingly fast. Faster than any tiny toy should realistically be able to move without flying free from their hinges. As we continued, the lumberjacks were cutting other things. Farm animals, people. Tiny lumberjacks had moved into a small settlement of log cabins and were relentlessly, eternally hacking away at tiny felled people. Blood spurts made of red metal wire jiggling this way and that as the torturous murders commenced. The light went out. The song still played. Still way too fast and way too loud. I felt my pants getting a little wet. The cart began to shake. It was shaking with increasing severity, like someone jostling the front car. Then the middle, working their way back. Suddenly, something hit me in the jaw very hard, like an uppercut. I felt something lash my face as well. It was like being hit from underneath by a child's shoe, foot and all, with the laces following suit. It was almost like someone had flown past, while kicking out violently. Reeling from the shocking blow, I slipped beneath the safety bar and crumpled to the floor of the cart. I cried out, but the music drowned the sound. I felt across the floor for help from the boy next to me, but I found only empty space from wall to wall within the cart. The music finally ceased, and everything was deathly quiet. Sniveling in the dark, I remained quiet. I didn't even breathe deeply. I listened for any sign of where everyone had gone or why they left. All I heard was a sound like a restaurant full of customers slurping soup with a mix of the absent, brainless chewing of a group of cattle. It wasn't loud, but in the darkness it seemed to echo all around me. The lights never came back on, but thankfully the cart had continued to move throughout the ordeal. Soon, I saw daylight as I emerged from the other end of the tunnel, still hunched down on the floor and clutching my swollen jaw. When I realized I was almost likely past the danger, or at least assumed I was, I boldly popped my head out of the cart and looked around. The sunlight burning my unadjusted eyes. I was alone. I don't mean I was alone in the cart, though. I was, but rather that there was absolutely nobody around. Not a single parent was there to greet anyone coming off the ride. The cart was still moving when I rolled myself over to the side and landed on the ground hard. I was frantic at this point, nearly crying. I moved as fast as I could through the grounds, making a beeline away from the timbered tunnel and toward the long building at the front of the park. The petting zoo was empty, except for the animals. Everything was empty. The game booths displayed unguarded prizes, and the other rides whirred and click-clacked with no passengers or no operators. As I made my way through the arcade building, I made sure to stop at each row of cabinets to see if my parents had come in there for some unknown reason. It was just as empty as the rest of the place. When I reached the parking lot, that's when relief finally washed over me. There was my mom and dad, walking toward our car. The other parents were here as well, doing much the same. "Mom," I called out. "Dad!" Nothing, not even a hesitation in their step. "Mom!" I repeated in a desperate tone. When I caught up with them, I slipped between them and took them by the hand. They both were in shock as they looked down at me, like I was some sort of creature that had suddenly grabbed onto them. "Hey," Mom said, almost as if she was remembering something from far away in the past. "Hey, where were you?" "Mom." I started bawling at this point. "Mom, I was in the tunnel. You left me in the tunnel. Where were you going?" "Mom? The tunnel?" she repeated, seeming mystified. "Ah, the tunnel." Dad grinned at Mom. "Yes, we left him in the tunnel, honey." Dad was making fun of me, acting like I wasn't making any sense, and like I was doing this on purpose. It made me so mad I could actually hear my own pulse. "But Dad, you guys did." I never convinced them. And to this day, I never convinced them of any of it. Even though we all got in the car and drove up the slope out of Whimsywood. 10 seconds later, they acted like they had never heard of the place. They acted like there had been no interruptions in the trip. Mom even said I dreamed it. We were just in the middle of talking about Whimsywood, and she had just said it seemed like a nice place, even if it was a bit run down. And in the next moment, she was talking about it being something I dreamt. I watched the car behind us that had just left from the park as well, without the child that had been riding along less than an hour earlier. Out of the passenger side window came the stuffed rabbit, a juice cup, a coloring book. By the time we reached Arizona, the combination of my parents' insistence that I dreamt it all, combined with the monotony of the remaining trip, had me worn down. I really started considering the idea that it wasn't real. I almost had myself fooled until the trip home. On our way back, we passed the billboards again. Games, rides, animals, family fun. 25 miles ahead. Hey, look, Mom said. You've been really good. Want to stop there on the way? Much to her surprise, I declined. Thank you guys for sticking around to the end. Be sure to check out these videos here on Yeah Man TV.